Welcome to the 97 Republic YouTube channel, where I react to UFC news and live events. So I kindly ask that you hit the like button and the subscribe button, as that will really help this channel grow. And to ensure that you don't skip a beat, feel free to click the notification bell. That way you can guarantee that you don't miss any of the action. I really hope you enjoy this. Main card predictions for UFC Fight Night: Moreno versus Erceg, starting right now. Starting off the main card in the flyweight division, Ronaldo Rodriguez taking on Kevin Borjas. And with regards to both their respective UFC careers, polar opposites of one another. We saw both men on the Contender Series. However, we saw Kevin Borjas win his fight, and we saw Ronaldo Rodriguez lose his fight on the Contender Series. The only reason Ronaldo got a UFC contract is probably due to the fact that he fights like a meth addict who has rabies. And with regards to their UFC careers, Kevin Borjas had 2 fights within the UFC thus far, ended up losing both. Ronaldo Rodriguez had 2 fights within the UFC, ended up winning both. And stylistically, it feels like this fight just benefits Ronaldo Rodriguez everywhere. And that is why I'm picking Ronaldo Rodriguez to win this fight. Ronaldo wants this fight to be chaotic, wants to have chaotic exchanges on the feet, wants to implement some wrestling, just basically wants to make Kevin Borjas uncomfortable. And we've seen Kevin Borjas be susceptible to leg kicks, be susceptible to pressure. We saw it in his last fight where his legs got so beat up, couldn't stand anymore, basically just got finished by his opponent on the ground. His opponent teed off on him, ref stopped the fight. And with regards to Ronaldo Rodriguez, the guy is so durable. In his fight against Odell Osborne at UFC Notches last year, we saw him not only get dropped, but we saw Odell Osborne sink in a very deep triangle submission attempt. And Ronaldo just refused to either fall asleep or on both occasions. He's extremely durable. I don't see either man actually getting stopped in this fight. If someone's getting stopped, I think it's Kevin Borjas. I think Ronaldo might end up winning via submission, but I'm going to say Ronaldo Rodriguez unanimous decision. Then heading into our second fight, where we have the debutant David Martinez versus his opponent Simon Oliveira, taking place in the bantamweight division. Now, this fight is somewhat similar to the previous one, where it is the technical striker versus, I'd say, the volume striker, more than a brawler. The only difference is when looking at David Martinez, when looking at how he fought on Dana White's Contender Series, he's a good technical striker, has good leg kicks, doesn't throw a lot of volume, but would basically use his strikes to dictate range, and he's very good at circling. Simon Oliveira is very similar to Ronaldo Rodriguez. The only difference is Simon's way of fighting isn't sustainable for him, due to the fact that a lot of times the way he fights, constantly moving forward, throwing wild stuff, lunging in forward, and initiating grappling exchanges, actually tires him out and wears on him and wears on his cardio, therefore not being sustainable. And we actually saw him get knocked out due to this fact. I don't like picking debutants, and I'm somewhat hesitant, but I mean, Oliveira isn't that experienced within the UFC. He's only had 2 fights where he lost both of them. So saying that, I think David Martinez wins this fight. I'm gonna pick the debutant. The fight is in Mexico. He is Mexican, home ground advantage. I think it does in some way settle some of the nerves. I think it does help. And with regard to the fight, seeing that David Martinez is really good at circling, doesn't really get pushed to the fence, and has somewhat good wrestling defense, grappling defense, I think he'd be able to resist and somewhat battle through Simon Oliveira's pressure. And I think that will weigh on Simon's cardio, and I think the same thing happens. However, don't really see a knockout happening, but just, it's a debutant. I'm gonna go with a second round knockout. I think in the second round, Oliveira tires himself out, and I think David Martinez capitalizes on that and goes on to knock Simon Oliveira out. Then in the third fight, once again in the bantamweight division, Rosas Jr. versus Vince Morales. Now, full transparency, it feels like someone is getting fed to the sharks. It feels like bait is getting put out for the predator, and we see Raul Rosas Jr., who has had 5 fights within the UFC at the age of 21. That is insane. That is an insane statistic. And he's 4-1. Obviously a very good wrestler. But he doesn't have bad striking either. Just the fact that his wrestling so dominant, is so good at it, prefers to take his opponent down, basically jockey for position, progress with regards to his positioning on top control, and then submit his opponent. But we saw his striking prowess as well, and really has somewhat good footwork, has good strikes, especially good at counter punching, has relatively good head movement. So I wouldn't say he's 100% complete, but he's getting there. I mean, the guy's 21 years old. Vince Morales, inside of his UFC career, his record is 3 wins and 7 losses. He is currently on a 4-fight losing streak. So do you understand? Now, obviously, it's mixed martial arts. Anything could happen. Nothing is ever a lock. However, this feels like as close to a lock as you could possibly get. Feels like they scheduled Raul versus Vince. They want Raul to dominate Vince and basically just build up his resume and just further enlarge the hype train behind Raul Rosas Jr. Vince has one glaring weakness. Yeah, you guessed it. Wrestling. Where he is susceptible whenever he fights a wrestler. Especially someone with the pressure of Raul Rosas Jr. Goes without saying that I'm picking Raul to win this fight. Being the better wrestler, even when this fight plays out on the feet, I don't think Vince has a considerable advantage, if even an advantage at that, whenever the fight plays out on the feet. I do think this is pure domination, and I'm picking Raul to win this fight by first round submission. I think it's gonna be that simple. Now, Vince is very durable and hasn't lost via stoppage a lot within his career. Where I think he has only lost via submission, I think 1 or 2 times. With that being said, Raul is a different animal. The guy has really good cardio, really good pressure, really good wrestling, especially offensive wrestling, good grappling. I just feel like Vince Morales is the lamb being led to the slaughter in this fight. Now, moving on to the next fight. In the middleweight division, where Kelvin Gastelum is taking on Joe Pyfer. Kelvin Gastelum, who has had 13 wins inside of the UFC, 9 losses, 1 no contest, 23 fights within the UFC. That is a lot of fights within the UFC. Taking on Joe Pyfer, who is 5-1 inside of the UFC. Just a couple of names that Kelvin Gastelum has fought. Now, Kelvin Gastelum is notorious for jumping weight classes, especially jumping between middleweight and welterweight. But just a few names. So, Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker, Darren Till, Jared Cannonier, Tyron Woodley, Johnny Hendricks, Michael Bisping, Jacare Souza. So, safe to say that whenever someone has been good within a division, especially in middleweight, Kelvin Gastelum fought that fight. And with regards to their skill set, feels like they are very similar, where both men serve predominantly as strikers, but both men would mix it up if they feel like they need to. Where we saw Kelvin Gastelum use takedowns in his last fight against Daniel Rodriguez, and we saw Joe Pyfer do the same thing when he fought Abdul Razak Al Hassan. I'd say the power advantage is with Joe Pyfer due to the fact that he is massive. He is a particularly big individual, so I definitely say that the power advantage is with Joe Pyfer, but with regards to volume, I think Kelvin Gastelum has the upper hand. And with regards to the victor of this fight, I'm picking Kelvin Gastelum to win this fight simply due to the fact that the guys Kelvin has lost to are the top guys within the division. And whenever Kelvin fights someone that is either unranked or at the bottom of the rankings, he tends to beat said fighter. Whether it is Chris Curtis, whether it is Daniel Rodriguez, we've seen Kelvin Gastelum beat these fighters. So I will not pick against Kelvin Gastelum until he loses against an unranked fighter. Now, Joe Pyfer has everything to beat Kelvin Gastelum. However, what is the value of power whenever you face someone who has not been knocked out in his 23 fights within the UFC? Now, he has been submitted. Do I think that Joe Pyfer could actually submit Kelvin Gastelum? There is a possibility for that happening. However, I don't think he would be able to, but he could, definitely could. I just think that power is, I don't want to say it's useless, but it's somewhat redundant whenever you fight a guy with the chin of Kelvin Gastelum. We saw the same with Elite versus Vittori. Whenever you fight a guy who has such a strong chin, power tends to not, not count for a lot. So I think Kelvin Gastelum wins this fight. I think this fight goes to a unanimous decision, and I think Kelvin Gastelum ends up winning by unanimous decision, just due to the fact that I think he has more volume, he'll throw more strikes. I think he'll win with regards to the striking exchange, just due to the fact that he will score better. I think Kelvin Gastelum wins this fight. Then moving on to the co-main event in the lightweight division, Manuel Torres versus Drew Dober. Manuel Torres, who is 3-1 inside of the UFC. Drew Dober, who has 13 wins inside of the UFC, 10 losses and 1 no contest, a total of 24 fights within the UFC. Drew Dober fought in Strikeforce in 2008, 17 years ago, at the age of 21. That is insane. That is insane. And usually when I make a prediction, I would tell the audience when I'm biased. And this is one of those instances. I am a massive Drew Dober fan, just due to the fact that the guy is blockbuster cinema, whether he wins or loses. 10 of his 13 fights has been via stoppage. Even in his losses, 6 of his 10 losses has been via stoppage. So, massive Drew Dober fan. And whenever I give a prediction where I am a big fan of someone, I tend to be biased. So, make of this what you will. But safe to say, yeah, I think Drew Dober wins this fight. And here's my unbiased opinion. Manuel Torres is predominantly a striker, and he's a good striker. The only problem with this is the fact that, for one, Drew Dober has a chin. They could use his chin as a foundation for a building. That is how big his chin is, and he doesn't really get knocked out. He got knocked out against Matt Frivola, and it felt like that was the anomaly. Where Drew Dober is extremely durable, even against Gene Silva, where Drew got pieced up, he lost by TK due to the fact that his face was basically just blood everywhere. So doctor stoppage, didn't really get knocked out. The problem is Manuel Torres is good at striking at a distance. However, Drew Dober is renowned for moving forward, and Drew Dober has incredible knockout victories over the likes of King Louis V Green, Terrence McKinney, even Nasrat Haqparast, who is extremely durable. Drew knocked him out. And I don't think Manuel Torres is as durable as either one of those guys. We saw him in the fight against Ignacio Bahamondes, where he got dropped twice, ended up losing that fight by a knockout. I think the same applies. I think Drew Dober wins via knockout, and I think it's going to be early. I think it's the first round, might be second. due to the fact that I think Manuel Torres is going to press forward, and whenever he fights at range, he's good. He is good striking at range, dictating range, having his opponent at the end of his punches, has a good 1-2, has a good jab. Whenever he enters the pocket, he gets clipped a lot. We saw that against Chris Duncan as well. The Chris Duncan that the previous weekend ended up beating Jordan Fucinic, fought that same Chris Duncan, and Chris rang his bell in that first round. Now, the only problem with this prediction is the fact that if Manuel Torres ends up wrestling, I don't know whether Drew Dober could actually avoid his wrestling. And wrestling has been a kryptonite for Drew Dober. In his fight against Renato Moicano, lost, got out wrestled, got out grappled. In his fight against Brad Riddell, lost, got out grappled. In his fight against Islam, same story. In his fight against Beneil Dariush, same story. So glaring weakness for Drew Dober is wrestling. However, with him having a very low center of gravity, I don't think Manuel Torres would be able to actually wrestle Drew Dober as easily. Therefore, I think the majority of the fight plays out on the feet. I think Drew Dober gets the knockout victory. Then moving into the main event, where we have Brandon Moreno, the ex-flyweight champion of the UFC, taking on the former #1 contender in Steve Erceg. Now, Brandon Moreno has had 10 wins inside the UFC, 5 losses and 2 draws. Steve Erceg, who is still relatively inexperienced with regards to his UFC career, has had 5 fights within the UFC, ended up winning 3 of them, lost 2 of them, is currently on a 2-fight losing streak after losing to Alexandre Pantoja and Kai Kara-France. And the question is, going into this fight, is whether Brandon Moreno is still on that level, on that upper echelon level of the flyweight division. Is he still the guy that fought Deiveson Figueiredo, that fought Kai Kara-France, that was somewhat competitive against Pantoja, but I mean, Pantoja's had his number for the entirety of his UFC career. Is Brandon Moreno still capable of fighting on that level? And I think so. I genuinely think so. I think wherever this fight plays out, Brandon Moreno has the advantage. If it's on the feet, I mean, Brandon Moreno with his very strong boxing stance is really good at range, is really good when he's in the pocket, feels comfortable wherever the fight takes place, especially on the feet. And with regards to his wrestling, has good wrestling defense, has good wrestling offense as well. He's not a bad grappler. So I do think that the problem is, I don't think there's a lot that Steve Erceg can throw at Brandon Moreno, which he hasn't seen before. I mean, Brandon Moreno has fought Deiveson Figueiredo 4 times. He has fought Kai Kara-France twice. He has fought Brandon Royval twice. Fought Alexandre Pantoja twice. So just the difference with regards to opponents and level of opponents that Brandon has fought compared to Steve Erceg. Now, even though Steve is not a bum, he is really good, predominantly a striker, has a good jab, has a good 1-2, likes to keep his opponents at the end of his punches. The problem is, whenever it gets into that pocket, into that void situation, Steve Erceg does get caught. And he doesn't have, I'd say, the best chin. I mean, he got knocked out cold against Kai Kara-France, which is, I think it's not a particularly optimistic image to see that happen. And I feel like Brandon Moreno would definitely be able to do the same. I think he catches Steve Erceg whenever Erceg enters that pocket, and I think Brandon makes Steve pay for that. I think it's going to be a knockout victory, which is insane. We were talking about flyweights, but Brandon Moreno has really crisp boxing, and I just think he'll be comfortable wherever the fight takes place. So I'm picking Brandon Moreno to win this fight. I'm going to go ahead and say I think it's going to be 3rd round knockout. Those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night Moreno versus Erceg. Let me know in the comment section which ones you disagree with. Let me know in the comment section which fight do you think on the main card would be the fight of the night, and will receive a performance of the night bonus. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.